Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. I am Garrett Price. I am with my good friend Rich Dotson. Rich, how's it going, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing pretty swell talking rookie wide receivers.
Always a good day talking rookie wide receivers. And of course, if we're going to talk wide receivers, why not get the wide receiver guru himself, Matt Harmon from Yahoo Sports and Reception Perception. Matt, how's it going, man?
What up, boys? It's a great time of year. The draft is fast approaching. You know, I feel like 90% of people that cover the draft right now are kind of like, all right, let's get there already. Like, let's get this thing done. They're so long in the lead up process. And I always feel like this time of year, no, give me like one more week because I would love to get like that many more prospects done, you know, and this year, especially because we're going to talk about it. It's a great receiver class. And, you know, no matter how many guys I get charted, there's always, you know, someone, and shout out to the Discord folks. There's always somebody in the Discord that's like, hey, have you seen this guy? What about this guy? What about this guy? What about this guy?
Yeah.
So there's just so many receivers to watch. So I'm really looking forward to talking with you guys today because it's just such a fun class to discuss.
Yeah, we break down the film of all the rookie classes every single year and break down rookies individually as well. And we usually do 4 episodes on the rookie wide receivers. And this year we're doing 6. And even then we're like, wow, like there's still some guys out there that we're going to miss or not see. And some guys going to go in the 4th round. I'm like, oh, we didn't even cover him.
Yeah. I feel you, man. I have that every single year. There's always like one guy that's just left off the list that really kills you. Last year it was Dontavian Wicks, and then he ended up having a really nice rookie year, very nice reception perception showing in the in-season rookie report. So it's always like, oh, that one guy that I missed. So yeah, I'm sure this year it'll be like 4 or 5.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Matt, before we get into the specific players and the specific prospects, can you tell us real quick, in your scouting process, when you're looking at these players, what are some of the main things that you're really looking for to identify guys that you like and guys that you're, they're okay?
Yeah, for me, obviously, with reception perception, you know, I'm charting routes, I'm charting route running, how often these guys get open against man zone press coverage, and I think that's a really good way to start to build a player profile. You know, a lot of people ask me this about the metrics with reception perception. From an NFL perspective, I feel really good about, hey, this guy's at this level in terms of success rate versus man coverage. We can pretty confidently say, like, okay, you're over 70%. You're going to file in somewhere on that, you know, really good to then you get up to 75, 76, 77. You're starting to get to like closer to the elite tiers of NFL receivers. And we can start using that to project statistical success. With college data, it's more difficult for a variety of different reasons. For one, just the level of competition is very different, right? Like you'll get your profiles that are, you know, Sky Moore or something like that, where he's has a great reception perception, but I mean, it's at a lower level. So you obviously don't want to say, well, he's got a higher, you know, success rate versus man than Garrett Wilson in that class. Like you should rank him ahead. Like, no, of course it doesn't really work like that. Right. So there's more context that needs to come with the collegiate data. But also what I think is my favorite kind of part of it is again, building a profile for a player and starting to kind of build like, what bucket, what archetype of receiver do they fit in? And, you know, that way you can look at it like, all right, they're not good at doing this, but what role can they fill in where that will be accentuated? You know, I don't know if we're going to talk about Keon Coleman in this episode, but he's a good kind of example of that, of a player that might need a specific type of role. So to me, it's less so about like, all right, this is kind of a pass fail or he's low in this, so this is not good. It's just, again, like kind of try to paint the vision of that, where that player might fit from a role perspective, from a team perspective, and then what those strengths and weaknesses can either be accentuated or kind of hidden at the NFL level.
Yeah, I love to hit on like Keon Coleman's a perfect example. A guy like Adonai Mitchell, you know, when you look at him, you're like, this guy just looks like an NFL stud and he could dominate. And then you look at his numbers and who he dominated against and a small amount of big time games you got. You're like, okay, does that translate to the NFL? I'd love to get your opinion on him. But, you know, I really want to start at the top of the big 3, you know, because I look at this class as, for my own personal opinion, this is probably the best top end class since Julio Jones and AJ Green. With Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, and Malik Nabers. Like, even the most novice Dynasty player will be high in these players because all three of those are most likely to go top 10 in the NFL draft, which is pretty nuts in itself. And sometimes we see these guys going top 10, a guy like John Ross, where they're based off of speed. But these three guys, they check all the boxes. Like, I was super pumped when I saw, on Reception Perception, with Rome Odunze and how big you were on Rome Odunze, because I've been preaching Rome Odunze since like November. I'm like, this guy has all the tools to be a dominant receiver. And I loved your comp with Devontae Adams. So, I think the number one question I would have is, how do you rank those three in order? From everything we're going to be talking about is from a fantasy football perspective, because we always say, hey, certain players always are better for an NFL team than they are for your fantasy roster. Because here at Dynasty Nerds, obviously right now in the community, tons of people are out there saying, hey, Malik Nabers is my number one wide receiver. That's my guy. And, and that's fair. Everybody come to their own conclusion, how they want to come about it. Here at Dynasty Nerds, we all came to the same conclusion that Marvin Harrison is in his own tier as wide receiver one. We have him locked in. And and I know the Garrett and the rest of us, we actually have Rome Odunze closer to like Malik Nabers than like those two are to Marvin Harrison Jr. So I would love to hear like how you view those three, because I can easily see Rome Odunze outperforming Malik Nabers from a fantasy football perspective, definitely from a dynasty perspective long term. And I always say that's no disrespect to Malik Nabers whatsoever, because I view him as an elite prospect. It's more respect for Rome Odunze and how everybody just kind of casually slides him to that third spot no matter what. And I'm like, listen, if Rome Odunze came out here and outperformed Marvin Harrison Jr. after like 6 years when it comes to fantasy football production, that wouldn't shock me in the least bit. So I'd love to hear how you view those three wide receivers and in the order that you would rank them currently today in the beginning of April.
Yeah, so my mission statement with the top three players in this class, which I'm with you, that's the clear top three, has been they're all top 10 graded prospects for me. They're guys that are worthy of a top 10 pick. They're ready-made star candidates at the NFL level. I think they are all in that tier to themselves in this class. And when I look at my board from the last four classes, they're all in my first tier. They're all guys up there that are clearly kind of at that same level. So with that being said, like, if you like Malik Nabers better than Marvin Harrison, or you like Malik Nabers better than Rome Odunze, or you like Rome Odunze better than Malik Nabers, like, I'm not going to really like argue with you heavily about that, because we know how this will go. Like, one of these guys ends up going to a better landing spot than the other. They're just going to be in a better position to produce than one of these other players. Now, I think certain systems and certain offenses will fit different guys at a different level and like easier paths to success there. But so that'll be kind of how it's judged. So to me, I'm not going to argue, like go on a 10-tweet argument with you about why I think this guy's better. But for me personally, as players, I have it as Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, and Malik Nabers. Again, all in the first tier. And I'll tell you what, guys, like, I struggled more with, like, whose film do I like better, Marvin Harrison's or Rome Odunze? Because Rome is just that clean to me as a prospect. Now, I ended up giving the edge to Marvin Harrison because he's, in terms of reception perception, double covered at the highest rate I've ever charted for a prospect. Like, everybody knows he's the dude, and they still can't stop him. His success rate against double coverage is higher than anybody that's seen double coverage at like even half the rate that he's at. So he again, I that was kind of what edged him to that first spot for me. But just from a player perspective, those guys are both X receivers. They fit kind of in the same archetype, and they don't really have a weakness in their game. I mean, especially just sticking on Rome here, like, he's a guy that will, again, line up as an X receiver. I think he can line up in other spaces too, but primarily he's going to be that outside boundary receiver. And you see him do everything at an extremely high level. He beats press coverage at an extremely high level. He's a great route runner, really strong technician. He has excellent hands. I think he has the best hands in the class. I think he's underrated as a tackle breaker. He's not going to make those mind-bending, ankle-breaking, angle-destroying plays like Malik Nabers is going to make, but he can make that first tackler miss and pick up a few extra yards there. Like, to me, that's a really safe prospect profile too. Like, it's hard for me to look at him on film and think, like, how is this not going to translate to the NFL level? How, in some degree, like how he could obviously have room to grow and all of that stuff, but I just see him being a successful NFL player. So, like, from a pure talent perspective, right now, this will obviously change in terms of landing spots after the draft. I have it Marvin Harrison, I have it Rome Odunze, and then I have it Malik Nabers, all tier 1 prospects, all top 10, graded guys here, but that's kind of my order of preference right now.
No, and I love that. And, we have another co-host on our show, Matt O'Hara. And in the Dynasty community, a lot of people, just like they look for you for the wide receiver takes, they always look for Matt, because Matt's the one guy who always comes out. Like, he had Justin Jefferson as like his wide receiver 1 when Justin Jefferson was coming out. Like, he consistently has the guys where everybody has as like the third, fourth guy. And he'll come out and find those outlier guys. And I told him yesterday on the show, I was like, I can't, because he hasn't watched Rome yet. And I was like, I can't wait for you to watch Rome, because I could sit here and envision you next week sitting in this chair and telling our audience that Rome Odunze is your number 2 receiver over Malik Nabers, and see everybody else go, oh my goodness. So for you to come out and say that Rome is your number 2 receiver, I love to hear that, because I have those guys neck and neck as well. So I love to hear that. And you're right. He wins at all level. And it's just, I say, like, I ended up just watching like a lot of Washington games this year. Like, I don't know how it happened, because I'm an Ohio State guy, but I just ended up watching a lot of Washington games. I'm like, man, this Rome Odunze, like, people are talking about Michael Penix, like, Rome Odunze is a big reason why this team is going where they're going.
Yeah, he was on a offense full of really good players, because, like, their left tackle, Troy Fautanu, is a really good player. Obviously, they have other good receivers on that roster, and Michael Penix is a highly touted quarterback prospect. But the best player on that team, the guy, was Rome Odunze. Like, he has game-ending plays. He has that sort of potential in his range of outcomes. And, like, even in the Michigan game where Washington got shellacked to the national championship, like, that was one of my favorite films for Rome Odunze, just because, man, he's open down the field. There's blocking issues up front. Michael Penix is not able to get the ball to him accurately. Like, that was one of the games that really sold me, though, on his potential, because he's out there against a quality defense, running routes and winning. I could go on and on, like, gushing about Rome Odunze, just because I really like him as a player. I definitely see, though, the idea from the NFL where there are teams that will prefer Malik Nabers, because just the way he can make those plays that we were just talking about. Like, he is a walking, talking, big play machine, and that reputation is earned. He's a super young prospect, right? Like, he's not even going to be 21 until after he's drafted, which is pretty crazy, because he is such a dominant player. But I think of the 3 receivers, and we're picking nits here, I do think he is the least refined of the 3 guys. Now, he has a ton of room to grow, and there's no reason to think he won't do that. He seems like a hard worker and a guy that's dedicated to his craft. I haven't been able to find anybody to say anything negative about that regard. So there's no reason to think he won't do that. It's very similar to me as a guy like DJ Moore. I'm not the only one to make this comp, but DJ Moore was a guy who was explosive, and Malik Nabers is more explosive, but an explosive player that separated really well in college, but wasn't the best technician. And then you saw in his first really like year and a half in the NFL, he was kind of a guy that they had to design plays for, but he could do that, right? And there was a lot of good results on those design plays, but now we're deep into DJ Moore's career, and he's a great technician. He's a great route runner. He's really good at beating press man coverage. That wasn't the case early in his career, but he developed into that player, and that's sort of like the career archetype I can envision for Malik Nabers. But guys, I mean, say if you're a team like the Giants, you're picking 6 overall. I know this on a Dynasty show, everybody's like, no, don't say the Giants. They're the top 10 team. Don't say the Giants. We don't want them to land there. But, like, if you're a team like the Giants, that it's a little weird because they have a bunch of slot receivers, and Malik Nabers line up a lot in the slot as a college player, but I don't see any reason he can't play outside. You have Daniel Jones, and you got to figure that out with your quarterback situation right now. You can just go to him and be like, hey, number 8, that guy over there, like, get the ball in his hands. Like, that's your one read, get it out or scramble. And like, I can see that working for a team like them if he ends up being their top receiver. But like I said, we're picking nits in terms of splitting these guys up. They're all very good prospects. And
you're right, system does matter. And Nabers probably would, if you want to get Daniel Jones back on track, outside of Marvin Harrison Jr., like, who will put any quarterback back on track, like, Nabers might be with the way the Giants are currently built with the offensive line, the mystery at the running game, and Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodges as your your number 1 and number 2 receivers out there. Nabers might be the best fit to reboot Daniel Jones to get the ball out quickly for a quarterback that can move and get outside the pocket. So, yeah, I love that as well. Because, listen, all these guys that go into the top 10, they're going to usually, outside now of Caleb Williams going to the best situation ever for a number 1 overall pick quarterback, they're going to bad situations, right? Like, that's why they're there in the first place, and you expect these players to elevate the guys around them and make them better.
Yeah, so let's jump into that next tier now. We talked about that top tier, and I think universally almost anybody you talk to is going to have in some order those top 3 guys. Then once you get to that next tier, it becomes the Wild West. It is wide open. There are a lot of differing opinions. So how do you differentiate some of these guys? Obviously, draft capital, landing spot will help with some of this. But, just off the top of my head, guys that I've seen people have at 4 and 5, we've got Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey. I've even seen Baker's name thrown out there. Like, who do you kind of have in that range? And maybe it's somebody I haven't even named. And how do you kind of differentiate that next tier?
Yeah, that next tier is harder to figure out because, like, if you're weighing it against previous draft classes, just for example, like to me, I had last year's draft class, I didn't have any tier 1 prospects, and I had 1 tier 2 prospect, which was Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then everybody else was kind of like a tier 3 prospect. I'm not sure that anybody. And I do think in this class, I think Brian Thomas is my clear 4 because I see him as a very useful player. I see him as a guy that, will he ever develop into a number 1? I think that's a question worth asking. But I think he's a player that you can line up out there as an X receiver and give him kind of that early career DK Metcalf sort of playing time and role, right? Where, it's funny. You look at Brian Thomas's reception perception profile, 67% of the routes I charted for him were a go route, a curl route, or a slant route. So it's a very stripped down route tree.
Sounds right.
You look at You look at DK Metcalf's route tree as a rookie, 67.4% of his routes were go route, curl route, slant route. Like that's sort of the plan for these type of players. And then you have to hope that he grows out of that volatile number 2 receiver role and grows into a true 1, which I don't think DK Metcalf is in the elite tier of receivers in the league, but he's kind of combating in that second tier to me as a true number 1, but not on the level of, CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson or any of those guys. So
sure.
I think that's sort of the path you have to hope for, best case scenario with Brian Thomas. But I can also envision scenarios where if he doesn't, I think he's a little underrated as a route runner and as a separator, but if he doesn't fully tighten up the fundamentals, is he a guy that tops out as a volatile number 2 receiver, Martavis Bryant type of comparison? I feel like every year we give at least I'll say I give a Martavis Bryant comparison out just because these guys come out and are so freaky. But like I've said that Christian Watson was a Martavis Bryant comp. I said Quentin Johnston was a Martavis Bryant comp. I do feel like Brian Thomas is the more actualized version of that archetype of receiver. So to me, I think he probably ends up going 4 in the NFL draft. And I think what I'm trying to figure out, guys, is who's after that? Who's the clear 5 and 6? And that's where I think it's a little more jumbled, but I feel pretty comfortable having Brian Thomas at 4 right now.
I have a clear cut number 4, but go ahead, Garrett.
I love everything you just said because I feel like you covered the gambit of what Rich and I talked about just a couple nights ago on Brian Thomas, where Rich is a little higher on Brian Thomas, I'm a little lower on Brian Thomas, and you covered like both ends of kind of his things he liked and the things that I was concerned about. You covered all of it, so you did great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, Matt, what I love about Brian Thomas is like he's so young at playing receiver. Like he hasn't even been playing that receiver that long because he was playing basketball for a while. And it's crazy to me that he got an offer from LSU before he ever even made his varsity football team. Like he's like
wild.
He's like, oh, wow, I got an offer from LSU. I guess I better stop playing basketball and start playing football. And like you said, there's flashes on his tape because, again, he's super young like Nabers, right? Like he's super young. And he hasn't been playing, kind of like a Dalton Kincaid, right? Like who hasn't been playing football very long. So there's a lot of room to grow. And on his tape, he shows flashes of like the ability of the way he can sink his hips to get in and out. And it's not all there, and he needs a lot of like work. But at least there's flashes for Brian Thomas's upside. But for me, I don't know if I'm speaking out of school here, Matt, but like my clear-cut number 4 guy here that I absolutely love is Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. This is a player that when I watch his film, it's full go as soon as that ball snaps from the center, he's full go. And everything that he does like so intelligently. He plays football so smart. Like he could find a soft spot in the zone. It's like he knows how that defensive back is going to play, and he can set him up. And his route running, and I'm a sucker for route runners because it's why I love Devontae Smith so much coming out of college, and Mari Cooper as well, because guys like Lad McConkey, they have long NFL careers, right? Because they can always find ways to get open, and like Matt said yesterday, show their numbers to the quarterback and be their safety net. And Lad McConkey, to me, he does everything. Like, he doesn't do everything where like he's a superstar, but he does everything really, really well. And his biggest nitpicking from him is like people like, well, his size, and I'm like, again, if you want to talk size, like a guy like Devontae Smith, who's a fantastic route runner, if there's a strong gust of wind, he might come off balance. So for me, Lad McConkey is my clear-cut number 5 receiver, because this is a player that I look at as like just a PPR machine, right? In the right system or with the right quarterback, there's a very good chance that he could be peppered with targets. Now, I also love Zay Flowers, and when Zay Flowers went to Baltimore, like I dropped it on my board because of the system that he was in and where he's playing. But I would love to see Lad McConkey somehow find his way into the back end of the first or the high second and kind of be the focal point, or worst case number 2 in the offense. But I love his profile. I love his tape. I watched. Sometimes you find players and like you're okay, I'm going to scout 5 games from every one of these receivers, whatever. He's one of those players I fell into. Like, I'm going to watch every single game that I could possibly watch to make sure that I'm not missing one, and kind of get blown away about like, wow, he doesn't even take a snap off. Like, he doesn't take a single snap off. So I'd love to hear like your thoughts on that, on Lad McConkey. And do you think I'm kind of nuts to be so high on a player of his caliber?
First of all, yeah, no. The fun part about watching a lot of Lad McConkey games is you can get through him pretty quickly, because there are some where he doesn't play a ton of snaps. He's not like an every down player. Like you watch every game of Ricky Pearsall, who I just finished last night, 2 nights ago. It's like those games are long, man. You're gonna get a lot of snaps in there. Ricky Pearsall playing like 70 plus snaps. Lad McConkey, not as much. It's kind of like watching J.J. McCarthy. You want to watch a bunch of pass attempts for him, you can get through those pretty quickly, because there's not a lot of them. But, man, I'm with you right now that at this moment, I do have him as my wide receiver 5, Lad McConkey. I'm with you there, man. I know the production profile isn't there. There's obvious injury concerns. You have to take those things into account, but film's really good, man. A really good player. And, he's going to get typecasted, and we can just say it. He's going to get typecasted because he's like a small white receiver. Like, oh, yeah, this is the next slot guy. Dude, he shows you real ability to – yeah, Hunter Renfrow, Wes Welker. Let's get this gym rat his lunch pail, man. Like, we know he's going to get typecasted like that, but he's not that player. He could definitely do those layup routes, but – like, you see him play outside, especially last year. Like, in the games I charted for reception perception, only 26.3% of his snaps were in the slot. Only 3.9% in the backfield as like a pre-snap motion type of player. You get a lot of him playing. He's not going to be an X receiver for you, but he can line up outside as a flanker. And he is a devastating vertical threat. I mean, he probably runs the best out routes in this class. 13.5% of his routes that I charted were out routes, and he has 83.3% success rate. He knows that teams fear him from a vertical speed perspective, and he can sell on that go route and then whip it to the outside, and he presents always a clean line, a clean path for the quarterback to throw to, whether he gets the target or not. That's just the reality of his game when you watch him as a route runner. So I actually gave him a Tyler Lockett comparison, which, longtime RP bros know I'm a big Tyler Lockett fan. So that was high praise for me as a guy that, yeah, you're going to line him up inside, but he's going to run vertical routes from the slot, and he's going to like play outside as well. He's a flanker in addition to playing slot. And the last thing I'll say about him too, maybe I shouldn't feel this way because he tested really well at the combine, but his after catch work snuck up to me, which, people get on Tyler Lockett because he, gives himself up when tacklers are nearby at this point in his career. But you got to remember, when Tyler Lockett came out, he was like a devastating punt returner. He was a guy that they could get on kick returns. And I think Lad McConkey shows those open field skills as well. I really like him. I don't, what's the ceiling for a player of this archetype? Depends on where the offense he goes to. But regardless, I really like him as a route runner, beats man coverage. There's going to be press coverage issues, tight coverage stuff just because of the size, but I do really like him as a player. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, and people talk Malik Nabers, yards after the catch, and obviously he's 10 times more explosive than a guy like Lad McConkey. But like if you watch Lad McConkey's film, you put the ball in his hands and he's spinning defensive backs, right? Like I can remember. I wish I could remember what game it was, but I remember watching a play where he catches the ball on the outside by the sideline, he breaks it back in, and he literally puts 4 defensive backs on skates with his hips and gets it into the end zone. And that was the play for me. I'm like, yep. This is it. This guy is 100% the truth. He's not just a good route runner, but he also is good with the ball in his hands. And those are the kind of players, because I say it all the time. We're chasing fantasy points right here in this business. That's what we're looking for. Like we're putting names on it, but like I compared it before the other day with like poker hands. Like, do you want to go in that poker hand with Ace King, or do you want to go in with like 9-10? Like different players are going to give you better chances to win. And Lad McConkey, to me, is like going to a hand with Queen King. Like I feel really good about it. I feel like I'll come out pretty successful. And he seems like one of the safest. Like people say, Brock Bauer is the safest player in this draft. Like Lad McConkey falls that category for me. When you say in your rookie draft, you're picking anywhere from 9 to 12. This is a player I'd love to get my hands on, because like he could be a wide receiver 2 on my team for the next 8 years. And to me, that's a championship caliber player, and I feel very safe with him. Yeah, he might not have the upside of a Brian Thomas, but he has such a higher floor than Brian Thomas at the same time. It's why I love him so much.
Well, before we wrap things up, is there anybody that you've been watching that you're like, this guy's not a big name, but I do kind of like him? It's a sleeper that not a lot of people are talking about, or maybe some people are. You're just jumping on the sleeper bandwagon, so to speak. Is there anybody like that for you at this point?
Yeah, I actually just mentioned him, and I know more people have started to talk him up, but he's a guy that had a long college career. He's a little bit of an older player, so I know he's not going to pop in some areas of the Dynasty community, but I'm a big fan of Ricky Pearsall's game, man. I really like this guy who you see him line up in a variety of different spots. I think he's probably another flanker slot candidate, not like a true X or anything at the NFL level, but this guy knows how to get open, okay? He knows how to get open against man coverage. He knows when to sit down against zone coverage, and has great hands. I know he's got a couple of highlight reel catches to his resume, but just overall a very reliable player in terms of catching the football. I see him as a guy that I went back. I'm still kind of debating on whose profile do I like better, Lad McConkey's or Ricky Pearsall's. I think I might end up giving the edge to Lad McConkey, but these guys are all kind of in the same bucket of like Zay Flowers to me, in my opinion, where Zay Flowers went in the first round last year. Like Ricky Pearsall's not going in the first round this year. I think Lad McConkey might threaten the first round just because there are more like kind of inside draft analysts that really seem to like him, so that makes me feel like the league probably likes him more. But Pearsall obviously didn't have the cleanest college career, but the final year was extremely good. Like I said, a guy who knows how to separate, knows how to get himself open. Probably just somebody that like I could see starting out as a number 3 receiver and then growing into like a high quality 2. So I know more people have started to kind of get on the Ricky Pearsall train a little bit, but somebody that I definitely see is like if he goes on day 2 of the draft, I think I wouldn't be surprised, and he'd be somebody like in my rookie draft that I'd be trying to target if it was a good situation.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing Pearsall get on the second round personally for what he's put on tape. I mean, you said highlight catches. He had a catch of the year, in my opinion, last year. At the very beginning of the season, that catch was unbelievable. That's how he popped on my radar. I'm like, who's this guy? Like you said before, like who's this white guy out here making this unbelievable catch out here? And finding his tape, you're right. He is one of the older prospects, though. So from a dynasty perspective, some people might be a little bit dissuaded to go that way. But he's got excellent tape too, and that's where we're at. Like you Garrett mentioned, like who are your kind of sleepers? You have the Xavier Worries, the Adonai Mitchells, and those guys, and Troy Franklin, and guys that we're even talking about, Javon Baker. And we have such a big group here. It's kind of like why I'm so excited for this NFL draft, because I can't wait to see where these guys go and what system they go into. And I've been saying as well, like where people are like, this receiver class is so good. And I'm like, well, wait till these running backs. Some of these running backs go day 2. And they're gonna fly up to like guys like Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson. Like they're gonna slip into the first round of your rookie draft. I said on my show, like people are like completely dismissing it, but like by the time the NFL draft ends, you're going to see a guy like Trey Benson go ahead of guys like Brian Thomas or even potentially even J.J. McCarthy because of their landing situation.
Yeah, right or wrong, like one of these guys lands in Dallas, they're getting steamed up. One of these guys even lands with the Chargers, they're going to get steamed up, right? Like there's just no doubt about it that some of these backs are going to end up kind of, pushing their way up the board. And that's going to make a really interesting second round for these wide receivers, especially because, let's say A.D. Mitchell goes to a spot that really needs an X. And I can think of several, the Colts, obviously, maybe more in the second round than the first round. But, if the Bills stick at 28 and they're like, hey, we're kind of weighing our grades with Lad McConkey versus Xavier Worthy versus, Ricky Pearsall, whatever. That's not the type of receiver we're looking for, right? We're looking for an X, and then A.D. Mitchell's definitely going to get steamed up if he goes to Buffalo or Kansas City, who also has that same kind of archetype of receivers, off the ball players, guys that you're getting in space. So there are certain, and you're so right to bring up last year's receiver class too, that these guys on paper didn't rank as highly, but then you saw where some of them landed. And look, everybody wasn't, as crazy as they should have been about Puka Nacua, but when Puka Nacua lands with the Rams and you start to see what he did in college and think about how they use receivers, and they did change their offense a good degree this year than what they had done in the past. And you're just like, yeah, that's a guy that Sean McVay is going to make use out of on these crossing routes and dig routes and getting him just open over the middle of the field. That's what we saw with him. With Jaden Reed, I loved Jaden Reed as a prospect last year. I was stunned that the Packers took him in the second round because I had seen pretty much every other board kind of being like, he's a third or fourth round pick. And I remember just after the NFL draft, it's this is a great spot for him because that is the exact right offense for him to go into. Even Tank Dell, Tank Dell was a guy that, probably from a system fit, it didn't make sense, but you could see why C.J. Stroud wanted to work with him because C.J. Stroud was great at throwing out routes to the field, and Tank Dell was one of the best out route runners in the NFL last year as a rookie. As crazy as that is to say, because he's 170 pounds or whatever, but that was who he was. So we're gonna have so much more clarity on these players once they land with these teams, but there's no doubt it's an exciting class with a lot of potential.
Yeah, definitely when you have such a big tier of those, let's call it not because I have a clear second tier out of the big tier. So but that third tier of receivers is so big. An NFL draft will clarify because like you said, situation, team, scheme, coaching, quarterback, all that plays into it. It all matters. And yes, it's the NFL. It's not for long, and those situations could change on the drop of a dime. But you can only go on what you have right in front of you. So you're right. I'm super excited. And last year, that all those players you mentioned came to fruition. And you mentioned Jaden Reed. I might have Jaden Reed higher in my dynasty rankings than anybody else in the entire community because I love the player, I love the fit, and I love the usage. And Tank Dell, all those guys, and that stuff does matter. So it's very exciting for this NFL draft because for us, as fantasy analysts, this is so exciting because these first 2 days, that first through third round, is just going to be littered with fantasy football prospects. I mean, the first round, the top 10 picks of the NFL draft is going to look like your rookie super flex startup draft is what it's going to look like.
We might get one defensive player, which is crazy. And last thing, not to end on a negative note, but it's also worth saying that some of these guys that we love from a prospect standpoint are going to get banged from a landing spot standpoint. Jonathan Mingo last year, didn't mention him. I really liked Jonathan Mingo in a big slot receiver role. I was like, that guy can't play outside, but if he's used off the line of scrimmage, if he's used on kind of these big crossing routes and stuff like that, that's a really good fit. Now, I didn't know this when the Panthers drafted him, but as soon as they opened camp, he's I remember talking to Mike Kay, who covers the team. He's playing as their flanker receiver, and Adam Thielen is that big slot. And it's the alarm bells start going off that that's not what Jonathan Mingo's good at, right? He can't play in that vertical receiver role. He should play in that role that Adam Thielen's playing. But Adam Thielen's a vet, man, and Adam Thielen, I think a lot of it was empty calorie production. But he was productive in that role for a very bad offense, but he was productive. So, again, a lot of these guys that you kind of see the vision for, that's why that landing spot's going to be so important because, what did we talk about on the show? This guy is this type of wide receiver. This guy is this type of wide receiver. Well, this guy does something completely different. They all have WR next to their name, but they might play two completely different positions, which that's going to then impact their immediate path to playing time. And then, from a dynasty perspective, we know that if they lose that value by a significant amount in their rookie year, especially for a guy like Mingo who loses a lot of value in his rookie year, and then there's a coaching staff changeover, it starts to really slip away from you very quickly. So like I said, I didn't want to be pessimistic there, but that is also a thing that can happen on the NFL draft day.
It does. It happens every year. A guy we love goes to a place we hate, and sometimes it still works out. I remember A.J. Brown. Everybody was super down on him going to the Titans, and he ended up being an absolute stud. So sometimes it still works out, but sometimes not so much. Well, Matt, anything else that you want to say about this class, or anything that you want to plug that you're working on at Reception Perception right now?
Yeah, of course. Just charting the rookie receivers out for reception perception, these incoming prospects. Man, I mean, again, we could go over name after name after name for all of these players. There's just so many good ones, and I'm hoping to get to as many as possible. So it's a really fun class, and I can't wait to, again, see where all of these guys land and kind of work through that final tier that we're talking about, that guys that might go on day 2 and everything, because it's a loaded class, man. There's a lot of names to get through.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, Matt Harmon, Reception Perception. Awesome time with you, Matt. Really, really appreciate your time. So for myself, for Rich, for Dynasty Nerds, we appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you again soon.